Hello students, welcome back to the virtual tutoring. I am your alternative English teacher, Sarishto, and today's lesson is a poem titled Mending Wall, composed by Robert Frost. Before we learn about the poem, let's discuss a little bit about the poet. I'm going to give you a brief introduction about the poet. Robert Frost was an American poet known for his realistic depiction of rural life and his command of American colloquial speech. So, an American poet who mostly depicts the rural life or simply the countryside life, the village life, and in his poems we will find that there is this element of the colloquial speech. If you don't know what a colloquial speech is, colloquialism or colloquial language is the linguistic style used for casual communication. So it is different from formal conversation or formal communication. It is a very casual communication. So he employs this technique in this poem also, Mending Wall. You'll find that he tries to use this casual language to express the poem. Also, we will find that in this poem, the setting is the rural setting. He was honored frequently during his lifetime and is the only poet to receive 4 Pulitzer Prizes for poetry. Pulitzer Prize is an American prize given in the field of music, poetry, literature, and so on. So he was also named the Poet Laureate of Vermont. So that is a brief introduction about the poet. Now let's discuss the poem, Mending Wall. I will not be reciting the poem since we don't have that much time. Let's dive directly into the context of the poem. So I'll be breaking down the poems into lines and into parts. The first part is from lines 1 to 4. Here the poet introduces the wall as a primary symbol, and he introduces the wall to us, the wall that exists between him and his neighbor. So there are 2 characters involved in the poem, that is the poet himself and his neighbor. In the poem, through the opening lines, we'll see that he introduces us, the wall to us, and we get the idea that he's going to be talking about the wall that exists between him and his neighbor. So if we look at the title, Mending Wall, then we will find that if we look at the literal meaning, if we try to find the literal meaning of Mending Wall, we'll find that he's going to be, it's talking about fixing something that is broken, and in this context it is fixing the wall, the broken wall. So that is what the title talks about. And in the first 4 lines, he says that there is something that does not love a wall. There is something that does not like it, that does not approve its existence. And this something is a natural force which splits the wall and creates these cracks in the wall. So we were first introduced. When we were first introduced, we find out there is already something that does not like a wall, and that is the force of nature. In the second part, that is lines 5 to 9, we'll find that again, he tells us that there is again another thing that does not like a wall, and this time it is not nature, but it is the work of hunters. So when the hunters are trying to chase the rabbit out of its hole to please the dogs, we find that in this in the process of doing so, there are gaps created in between the walls so that people can pass in between the walls. So within these 9 lines, he presents 2 factors that does not like a wall and tries to destroy it. That is, the first one is natural forces. The second is intentional, um, uh, and that is the work of hunters. In lines 10 and 11, he talks about this mysterious appearance of the cracks or breaks in the wall. He says that no one has ever seen them met or heard them met. He's talking about the cracks in the wall. But when springtime comes and he and the poet and his neighbor tries to come and tries to fix the wall, they find the cracks in the wall. The mysterious nature of the appearance of cracks in the wall. Lines 12 to 16. This is the time when he introduces, when he tells us that, how they fix the broken wall. So it's springtime, which means it's mending time. The neighbor and the poet and his neighbor, they come together during spring and they fix the broken wall. They come together to fix the broken wall so that they can be separated again by the wall. So it talks about the separation rather than being united. In lines 17 and 19, the poet employs a playful tone when he says that they have to use a spell to let the stones stay where they are without falling. He employs this playful tone. The reason why he says that they have to use a spell is because not all the rocks and boulders are of the same size and shapes. They are of different sizes and different shapes. Some are perfectly round and some are shaped like loaves. So the ones that are shaped like loaves will stick to the wall easily, but the ones that are spherical in shape or round in shape, they easily fall off. So the poet employs this playful tone of the idea of using a spell to let the rocks stick without falling. And in lines 20, 21 and 22, he talks about difficult physical labor that has to be done while repairing the wall. Lines 23, 24, 25 and 26 talks about different plants that the poet and his neighbor grow in their garden. This is the part where the poet tries to convince his neighbor that they do not need a wall between them. So he's trying to convince his neighbor that they don't need a wall. And to convince his neighbor, he uses the example of the different plants that they grow in their gardens. So what the neighbor grows in his garden is pine trees. What the poet grows in his garden are apple trees. So as we can see, pine trees and apple trees are totally different, right? And that is the point that the poet is trying to make here. He's saying that since we both grow different types of crops, different types of plants in our gardens, then there won't be any confusion, any dispute between us since we grow different plants. But his neighbor can only respond by saying, good fences make good neighbors. This line brings out the personality of the neighbor. In just one line, the personality of the neighbor is revealed. From lines 28 to 31, the poet brings another example, trying to convince his neighbor that they don't need a wall between them. He says, walls are needed, walls are required in places where there are animals. Here, the animal referred here is cows or cow. But he says that we do not have cows here. We do not have cattle. We do not have any animals that can possibly intrude, cross over to the other garden and destroy crops and create problems. We do not have cows. We do not have that kind of animals here. That is why we do not need a wall. But his neighbor is still unconvinced. Lines 32 to 35 here, he talks about the double function of the wall. The poet talks about the double function of the wall through the phrase walling in or walling out. Now this wall, through this line, talks about the duality, the dual function of the wall. Walling in, meaning you're walling in your you're walling in your property, but at the same time you're walling out any relationship, any connection with the outside world. So that is the double function that the poet addresses here. In lines 36 to 38, again he employs a playful tone, and by talking about elves. He says, again, he talks about something, that force which does not love a wall, and he says that maybe it's the elves that does not like a wall, that does not agree with the idea of having a wall between them, and wants to destroy it. He is trying to be playful here, which also portrays his character, his personality. But unfortunately, sadly, his neighbor does not follow suit. His neighbor is not a very good sport, so lack of humor. The poet cannot be humorous by himself, so he fails again miserably in his attempt to be playful. Lines 39 to 42. In this line, he refers to his neighbor as primitive, which we will find in line 40, like an old stone savage. A savage, if you look at the literal meaning, is an offensive way of referring to a person who is considered to be simple and not highly civilized. So he's referring to his neighbor as primitive, someone who moves in darkness. The poet is not talking about literal darkness, but he's talking about his neighbor being trapped in the past, and he continues this argument till the end of the poem. He says that through the lines 39 to 45, we will find that the poet is trying to say that his neighbor is not willing to change. He is not willing to move forward. He is not willing to progress. The poet likes to believe that his society, his then present society, was progressive and modernized, but believes that his neighbor is still living in the past, still trapped in the past, because one reason why is because his neighbor cannot simply get over the saying that his father's belief that good fences make good neighbors. Maybe that was true in the past, centuries ago, but according to the poet, it is not relevant as of now. So it is not relevant today. So the poet, maybe his forefathers also held the same idea, held the same ideology, believed in the same thing, but he likes to think that he has moved forward, he has progressed. So he has left the old habits, old traditions which are not necessary anymore, and moved forward. But his neighbor is still stuck, trapped in the past, and has refused to move forward. So he the poem again ends with the very phrase, "Good fences make good neighbors," said by the speaker's neighbor. So that brings us to the end of the poem. Let's talk a little bit about the theme, custom and tradition. We'll discuss one theme today. So what happens in this poem is that the speaker and his neighbor have a custom. That custom is mending the wall when spring comes, and this divides their properties. The speaker he initially enjoyed this activity, but as time went on, he grew rather tired of it, and he started disagreeing with it. And although some customs and traditions may be necessary or are necessary, he believes that not all customs and traditions are necessary or are still relevant today just because they have been passed down from generations. So that is the idea that the speaker holds, and while his neighbor holds the exact opposite of what the speaker thinks. So that is the theme of custom and tradition. How traditions and customs can sometimes tie us down, and we have a choice whether to progress or whether to be stuck in the past. So that is all for today's lesson. I wish you happy learning. I'll see you in the next class.